Well, thank you so much. Let us introduce you to a great expert in the global financial system, Mr. Laurence Fink. He's a chairman and CEO of Blackrock, the largest asset manager in the world. As you know, Blackrock works in Mexico, has a huge office in Mexico, and is a long friend of our country. And a lot of projects are going on with Blackrock and the industry, particularly the industry of pensions in Mexico. So we're very honored to have you, Larry, here with us, and it's a pleasure. Let me start by making some questions regarding the global economic and financial outlook, and using your broad experience on the issue. Looking first at the economy, how does the crisis we faced in 2020 compare to other economic crises in the past? What new lessons have we learned this time, Larry?
Well, thank you, Bernardo, and it's a great pleasure to be part of this this conference. And well, the crisis is something that's larger than anything we experienced in our lifetimes. Every component of society is impacted one way or another. Some components of society are heavily impacted, and for many companies may be permanently impacted. And then for some other industries and companies that have done very well with the crisis. But I would say, reviewing the outcome of the crisis and where we are now, I would come away with a lot of optimism. A lot of optimism because in 10 short months, it appears we have 3 vaccinations. 2 of the vaccinations are a very special, unique, new form of vaccinations using synthetic RNA and delivering it specifically to create the antibodies in your system, triggering that antibody response. One is the traditional way of using the real antibodies from another human being and replicating that. The magnitude of that science discovery is just tremendous. And it leads me to be overly optimistic for the future. Now, let's step back though. As I said, this crisis has been greater than any crisis. Large segments of society have been really harmed by that. We're seeing actually more income inequality because of the crisis in the United States, in Mexico, in all the emerging world. And so there is some huge impact because of this crisis. But because of strong governmental intervention through fiscal stimulus, strong intervention by central banks through monetary policy, we stabilize the world's capital markets. And then what is unique, and this is something I would have never gotten right, we're seeing how humans adapt very rapidly. So the majority of people are now working remotely still in many businesses. They're not spending any money on commuting costs. They're not taking an hour each way to commute. And in many ways, this has become a big blessing. Think about the savings you have. You're not commuting to the office. You're saving whatever that time takes to commute to the office and to back home. And in many industries, we're able to function quite successfully. The industries that are impacted are the industries where human beings come together. Whether that is an industry of tourism, hotels and lodging and hospitality, conventions, cultural events, sporting events, the aggregation of human beings is being limited dramatically now by COVID. And until we have these vaccinations that are fully disseminated and human beings feel safe to aggregate, we're not going to see that rebound anytime soon. And so one of the big impacts specifically for Mexico is tourism. And how can tourism rebound back to where it was? It's going to take quite a bit of time until human beings are able to travel and travel without any thought of safety or health. And so it's going to be sometime post-vaccination where people are going to start feeling comfortable again. But so we're seeing what I call the K economy. We're seeing segments of the economy doing exceedingly well. Economies that create this type of technology that allows us to work remotely. Think about where we would be in the world if we had this COVID crisis 6 years ago, 7 years ago, before we had the technology of video conferencing in such large ways and connecting people and connecting companies and businesses. As I said, we're seeing humans respond differently. They're not commuting. They're spending more time at home. They're not going to restaurants as much. So we're seeing worldwide more and more people spending money on their homes, fixing up their homes, fixing up their kitchen. More people are eating at home now. And so grocery stores are doing very well right now. People are now building home offices because they can say, I could work from home, or I could be educated at home, or I could now have some of my medical advice being delivered at home through the internet. And so we are evolving, we're changing, and we're evolving and changing very rapidly. And so what I'm trying to suggest is there's some industries that are big winners, and the industries about human connection, human aggregation, those industries are still in trouble. And that is what's causing this K economy. Some industries doing well, some industries are doing very poorly. And that's going to persist for some time. The other issue, though, Bernardo, I don't believe we're going back exactly to pre-COVID. I think we're all going to, some of us are learning how to do our jobs better. Maybe some people can do their jobs better at home, working remotely. So we're going to see very large changes how we operate. Do I think human beings are going to go back to malls and shop at malls versus shopping online? Maybe, but not nearly the pre-COVID level. Are we going to, we're going to change our lifestyle and how we live. And some of these are going to turn into really societal blessings. Think about Mexico City for a minute. If 30% less congestion because people were working from home, wouldn't that be a blessing? Think about what it means for the environment of Mexico City. I mean, I could speak about New York City. If we had 30% less congestion, this would even be a better place to live. But, it's going to take time. We're evolving. We're changing. These are all positives in the long run. But we now, most importantly, we need to get over the crisis. We need to have the vaccinations in hand. We need to have people feeling safe and secure. We need people to be feeling safe that they can walk on the streets without a mask on. And that's still sometime in the future. And at that time, when we feel safe, that's when the entire economy can be lifted back. And maybe we could find ways of turning the trend of more inequalities and try to find ways of creating more societal equalities.
Excellent. Thank you, Larry. Is there anything that has surprised you from your initial expectations when everything started, and what has been going on during these 9 months that we've been living this pandemic?
Well, I never thought I could work at home. So, I've actually been quite successful working remotely, and it works. I would say on a larger level, when we developed the technology at Blackrock to operate, we never developed technology, or we thought we never developed technology to have 16,500 offices, everybody working remotely, and we were successful in that. And so there are many surprises how we learn, how we adapt, how we evolve, and we're probably better for that. Gosh, I remember in spring, everyone said, okay, we're going to get over this COVID thing, and then we enter summer, everything's fine, it's over, behind us. And then the summer came on, and everyone said, well, I'm waiting for fall, and everything will be fine. We've had high expectations that this would be short in duration, and now we're at a point now where we're saying, it's going to take longer. And as Mexico has seen, as the United States has seen, This virus has huge impact on the elderly, those who are compromised. Even in the United States, where there's about 275,000 deaths, 100 to 125,000 of those deaths were men and women in nursing homes. And so when you think about the disease is heavily skewed towards those who are compromised already. And so we've seen different outcomes from different components of society. But I would say overall, my surprise is the resiliency of humanity. We all find ways to move on, even with so many people and families have been impacted by losing a loved one. We are still finding ways of building, of renewing, of refreshing. We're evolving. We're getting better at what we do. And so, you know, I'm always positively surprised how successful humanity is in trying to cope and evolve. And this is another example. This is why, you know, here we are at a conference about pension funds and the Afores. It's about the long-termism. I mean, one of the reasons why I think we have had Blackrock success over these years is we're an optimist over the long run. We're a pessimist in the short run. It is through that pessimism that we solve problems. It is that pessimism that addresses problems so we can be more optimistic in the long run. And so all this pessimism should not confuse the fact that these create good outcomes for the long term. And this is one of the big issues around like navigation and management of Afores of pension funds. This is about a long journey. It's not about the ups and downs of a market of any one quarter, any one year. It's about a long destination. And to me, once again, it reaffirms, it's not something I learned, but it reaffirmed this whole view of long-termism and why long-termism is so essential.
Sometimes that is so difficult to convey to the public and particularly to the media, Larry, because everyone is like looking at the market and if it has dramatic drops or what's going on. So I think it's very valuable, your comment regarding that.
But I would also tell everybody, be pessimistic in the short run, but don't get confused what that means for the long run. It is the noise of the media. The media makes money on the velocity of money. The media makes money on putting fear in everybody. That's how they make money. In fact, there's more viewership when things are bad than when things are good. There's less viewership when things are good. That's the human condition. It's amazing. We like to watch misery, but we don't like to watch glory. Well, that's a overgeneralization. But for all men and women who are focusing on building their own retirement, and for all the Afores and all the long pension funds that are focusing on long journeys, long destinations, we can't get confused about this short-term noise. The short-term ups and downs is really noise. Think about those people who panicked in March and April, who got out of the market.
Really? They lost a lot, yeah. Mm-hmm. You're totally right, totally right. Let me go to another topic, Larry, regarding the policy responses around the world to COVID-19. Governments and regulators have taken historic policy measures to support their countries and their economies. We've seen different countries taking different approaches. How do you view policy responses thus far? Have governments reacted in general strongly enough? Will additional stimulus will be required? And what are your views on the long-term implications on inflation and interest rates?
Great question. Let me just touch on Europe first. As Europe's policy response post the Great Recession in 2008 and 9 were really bad. They were highly dependent on monetary policy. And I think this is why it took Europe so long to rebound from the 2008 and 9 crisis. In the United States' case, we did quite a bit of monetary policy and fiscal stimulus in 2008. So into 2020 now, the European community did a large fiscal stimulus plus significant monetary stimulus. In the United States, it was both strong fiscal stimulus and large monetary policy stimulus. There is probably a need for another targeted fiscal stimulus in the United States between now and when the vaccination is freely distributed, sometime in spring, or vaccinations. And so there is a need for some targeted stimulus for some segments of the society. But as I said, there are segments in our society that are doing exceedingly well. And the question is, how do you target it for that segment of the society that's not doing well? And the question is, is it society's responsibility of funding companies that are probably going to not exist in 2 years or 3 years? You know, should you allow industries or companies that have lost their purpose? Should government still keep those companies alive with the high probability of the outcome they're not going to exist? These are big fundamental questions that every country has to ask. You know, jobs are the most important thing to secure. So if you're going to try to secure jobs, you may want to keep more companies going for the future, even though that they may not exist. Maybe society's interest in these companies through consumption is reduced and they're not viable anymore, but you still keep them going. These are the mix and balances that every country has, every finance ministry has, and central bank has. These are the type of questions that I've been asked personally by many finance ministries and central bankers. Let me just raise one issue, though, and this is really a key for all the pension funds and the 4As. I think all countries have been overly dependent on monetary policy. And monetary policy obviously monetizes financial assets, elevates the prices of financial assets, lowers the yields on fixed income. And as a result, we don't analyze at what cost are those policies, at what cost do those policies impact, long-term savings rates and long-term retirement rates. We all know with extended short rates being low to negative, our liability costs go up, and therefore we have to take on more risk to achieve those liabilities. And that's a trend worldwide. And we don't know the end of that story. We don't know if you're investing today, what will that investment look like in 10 years? And those are some big, interesting questions. And so, when we think about monetary policy, are we thinking about what the physical impact is on retirement funds and retirement savings? It's pretty debilitating, as we all know, and for an industry that's all about retirement. Let me just bring one other societal issue. Like in Mexico, who owns stocks, basically? Wealthy people, upper middle class people, the poor do not. Who benefits from monetary policy? The wealthy. And so the problem with monetary policy, it is not as targeted as fiscal stimulus, but monetary policy elevates financial assets, and the biggest beneficiaries of elevated financial assets are wealthy people. So it creates even more inequalities. And that's something that society has to understand. And so for those who were involved in, those who are consistently investing in financial assets, those parts of the society have done very, very well. Those have not have been harmed. Those who are in retirement and are trying to earn a fixed savings rate, they've been really harmed. And so we all know the pluses and minuses, but to answer your question, policy responses to date have been strong. There may be a need for more fiscal stimulus and less dependency on monetary policy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Larry. And you mentioned Mexico going into the region, into Latin America and the Mexican economy outlook. BlackRock, as I was saying at the beginning of our conversation, is really committed to Latin America, to Mexico, and it has a large presence in our region in terms of servicing clients and investments. We know that the current economic crisis impacts both developed and emerging markets in different ways. For Latin America, Larry, what would be your perspective, and in particular, the economic perspective also of Mexico?
Well, as you framed my role, I have a big believer in Mexico. I think the vitality of the country, the educational level of the country, the industrialness of the citizens of the country are very strong. And I think Mexico's location is a very privileged position, a very wonderful position, because if you believe in the North American Trade Agreement, if you believe that we are all connected, I'm a big believer in North America, the power of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And I do believe what COVID has done is identified many problems in our supply chains. And I think as a result of that, we're going to see many more supply chains moving closer to the demand. So the demand for North American goods is very powerful for Mexico. And that's one of my fundamental views of why I'm very constructive in Mexico. Obviously, Mexico needs to address its issues around crime and personal security. And there are many issues that are hindering the Mexican economy. And we all know it. I'm not saying anything that the audience doesn't know. But if Mexico could solve those issues in a very positive way, then I think Mexico can see accelerated growth. As we all know, for the last few years, Mexico has really experienced a pretty subpar growth. And so, you know, we'll see how this all plays out. But I am bullish on Mexico. On other parts of South America, I'm a little more concerned than other parts. I think COVID has had a very big impact on some parts of other parts of South America. I believe climate change is going to have a remarkable impact on many parts of South America. I think related to sustainability, parts of South America have been light. Mexico has been, you know, faster in elevating the whole concept of sustainability, especially as an investors. And so I'm probably less bullish on South America than I historically am. And I believe the restructuring of Argentina was tough. Again, it happens too often, shifts of governments back and forth. It really just is it's a real issue. We had a restructuring in Ecuador. In Brazil is either fabulously happy or fabulously unhappy. And we need to have Brazil center a little more in the from extremes into the center. But we all know Brazil has huge potential, and Brazil generally disappoints. One of the big issues for Brazil, it needs to take a more leadership role on sustainability. But over the long run, it's hard not to be bullish about Brazil and other parts of South America over the long term. Having a currency that is, that eroded by 50% almost from 3 years ago. The real and Brazilian goods are very competitive now. This is one of the reasons why the Brazilian market is up so much from its lows a few years ago, because now on a currency adjusted, it's pretty flat, so there's opportunity, but we all have to be mindful. Climate change is going to be impactful of the entire component equatorial part of the world, with rising heat and rising humidity, bigger storms or disruption. And so it's easy for me to become long-term or remain a long-term bull on Mexico. It's harder for me to become long-term as bullish on the rest of South America as I am on Mexico.
It's great to hear your outlook on Mexico, and of course, we are also, as the pension fund industry, very confident on that. As you know, probably there will be a pension reform soon, which will increase mandatory savings. That would be also very useful to develop the country, to create infrastructure, among other things. You talked, Larry, on climate change, and regarding that, the industry of asset management has a lot to do for sustainability. Actually, the main theme of this conference is to discuss what we have to do now to still have a future and a promising future, both for retirement, starting to save now, particularly for young people, to take care of the climate, and also to be more equal, incorporate women to boards, and all of these that could make a better society for everyone. Blackrock has been very engaged in pushing for what we call ESG investing. Could you tell us, Larry, what are the efforts that you're doing globally? And let me, by the way, congratulate you, because we knew just a few days ago that Brian Dees was named head of the Economic Council in the US, or will be nominated, and he was a very important speaker in our conference last year, exactly regarding talking ESG. So, Larry, going back to the question, sorry, could you tell us more of what Blackrock is doing in this regard, and why it's so important?
Well, I would say probably the most important thing what we're doing is we came of a view that climate change is investment risk. And one of the beauties of finance, once you understand a problem, you bring that problem to the present. Climate change, a lot of people think, is a future problem. But once you believe it's not just a future problem, it's going to be a current problem, we see a large reallocation of capital. And so we have been witnessing a huge reallocation of capital. We're seeing huge flows into sustainable products now. We're seeing a big differentiation for companies who are much more focused on ESG in the industry versus companies who are not. That's showing up in the difference in PE ratios. And more than ever before, we are witnessing more and more dispersion between the good companies and bad companies. And so the focus on ESG, the focus on climate change as an investment risk is real. And it is becoming more and more known that it's real. And through that process, we're seeing this whole reallocation of capital. And Blackrock is playing a big role in trying to help clients, help them understand how every pension fund, every Afore can focus on investing through the lens of sustainability. We're with our Aladdin technology to try to helping more people understand climate risk as investment risk. We're trying to develop those types of analytics. We believe sustainability issues are becoming even more important in this COVID world. The existential health risk of COVID is not any different than the existential risk of climate change and the physical impact on our world. And more investors are starting to recognize that, and especially for the Afores and long-term investors, they have the ability to invest for that future and not worry about the ups and downs of the marketplace. And so we believe this trend is going to continue.
And let me tell the audience, Larry, that you just sent a letter to CEOs. Well, you send it every year, but your letter this year focused particularly was a pledge to make sustainability the newest standard for investing at Blackrock. And that's the size of the commitment of Mr. Larry Fink with the environment and with the sustainability of investment around the world. So thank you, Larry, for that. Finally, I would like to ask you a question regarding the retirement industry. Why it is important, Larry, to discuss things about retirement and why it is so important for people to realize that the retirement starts to be built and now, not tomorrow, not the day after tomorrow, but every day.
Absolutely. So I call it the silent crisis. I think it's the biggest crisis in most of the world that we don't talk about, and that's the silent crisis of retirement. Too few people do not believe they need to be investing for their retirement. And so there's huge inadequacies in Mexico, huge inadequacies in the United States, where people are under-saving for retirement. And they're too reliant on Social Security. And so it is important to try to help raise a level of financial literacy so people can understand the value of investing over a long horizon, getting and receiving the compounding of returns over time, investing over the long run. And there's a higher probability that you have enough savings to live retirement in dignity. But because we don't talk about it, there's large segments of society will not be able to live in retirement with dignity. And I think this is one of the reasons why we have such rise of populism right now in all the countries of the world, because people want answers and they haven't been told with total transparency what's going on, and people want to have hope for their future, and they're fearful that they're undersaved, or they did not understand the value of compounding of returns over time. And so if we don't talk about it, the crisis is only going to get worse. And so therefore we have to talk about it. We have to bring it up. We don't want to be an alarmist. We want to inform, and through that information, we hope that we have better outcomes, because if people start understanding it, they'll save more and they'll be more prepared for their retirement.
Definitely, Larry. Thank you so much for your insight, for your comments. And of course, again, it's an honor to have you here in our panel. It's a great pleasure and a privilege to hear you every time. Thanks a lot, Larry.
Thank you, Bernardo, for the opportunity to speak today. It's clear from today's discussion that the tremendous toll of the COVID-19 crisis on health, economic well-being, and everyday activity has precipitated a widespread reassessment of the way we live our lives. In Mexico, like so many other places in the world, national statistics show poverty has grown, and that workers with the lowest incomes are more likely to be hit hardest by the pandemic. And like in America and parts of Europe, as cases surge again, we need to remain vigilant. In recent weeks, we've received some encouraging news about more effective antivirals helping shorten treatment and recovery times, and the whole world is cheering on the vaccine manufacturers with a hope that these medicines will be deployed very, very soon. Mexico, like many nations, will ultimately need to go through a difficult rebuilding process. But the resilience of Mexico and its people's qualities I have long admired personally, is also what keeps me optimistic about your long-term opportunities. How we emerge from this present an opportunity for governments, for companies, for people to shape a more equitable, sustainable future. We're already seeing resilience and innovation within certain industries as they adapt to the new paradigm, and as the pandemic accelerates structural trends. Technology stands out as a key bright spot, and so are the industries that are embracing technology to power their own businesses, like healthcare companies that are now seeing more patients online, or in financial services where financial advisors are moving clients' conversations to a digital experience. This transformation is underscoring the importance of access to a strong internet connection and broadband infrastructure, not just for work and commerce, but for education and for keeping families and communities connected to each other and to the world. And this access to strong internet connection is unequal in many parts of the world, including in developed nations like the United States, and especially in developing nations like Mexico. This should be a priority for governments and private sector alike. In fact, it's just one example of how the pandemic has exacerbated inequalities, income inequalities, healthcare inequalities, and inequalities in opportunities to advance one's own education or one's own career. That's why Blackrock is partnering with local nonprofits to train people in Mexico for careers in information technology and other fields that will be increasingly in demand. We've also seen that companies with strong sustainability characteristics, companies focused on all their stakeholders, not just their shareholders, but their employees and the communities which they operate, have weathered the crisis much more effectively. Knowing this, what can the investment industry and firms like Blackrock do? First, we can make investing available for more people. We live in a world where the benefits of financial markets are not evenly shared, and we have a real opportunity to address barriers to access and participation in financial markets for individuals. Second, we must make sure that companies focus on the long term, operate sustainability, and serve all their stakeholders, addressing issues like diversity, fair treatment of workers in their supply chain, and climate preparedness. In every market where BlackRock operates, we are guided by those same values and principles in delivering on our purpose of trying to help people experience financial well-being. I'm optimistic that we can create a more positive future, both for Mexican people preparing for retirement and for our clients around the world looking to invest in Mexico. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. It is a great honor for me to be a part of this event. I wish you all the best and for everyone to stay safe and healthy. Thank you, Bernardo, and thank you all for listening.